Yo, what is up, y'all? Welcome back to the Father Built Podcast. This podcast is all about building up fathers in holiness, healthiness, happiness, and aiming to give fathers the tools to build their house of legacy. I am your host, Bobby Peacock, and I am so excited to be back with y'all. This episode is just me this time, so let's get it. So let's break down the last episode, or the last two. I had a good friend of mine, Julian, on the podcast. He's a retired law enforcement officer, and also a politician. And so we got a little bit into the weeds, especially at the end of his episode, talking about the LGBTQ plus community and traditional marriage. And I just want to let you guys know, and I think I said this in the last podcast, that I'm going to have people on this podcast that I disagree with, that you may agree with, that you may disagree with. I'm going to have fathers and men on this podcast that are living different lifestyles, that are in different parts of their life. And so and so we got into the weeds, and then I felt like we just had to do round two, and just talk about it and defend both of our perspectives. And so it was a great conversation. Feel free to listen, but I want to come on, just do a solo podcast because, well, one is it's my podcast. I'm just kidding. That was me saying that because I was trying to think about what I was going to say next. AKA I forgot what I was going to say next. But just to clear up some things to move forward, because some of y'all may be thinking like, yo, well, if this podcast is about fatherhood and masculinity, why are we talking about, the pride community, and Bobby, you're over here, defending your perspective, and part of it is that does have to do with masculinity, and for me, I'm gonna continue using the word traditional masculinity, but most important, I think the questions that I really want to answer and talk about in this podcast is, like, how do we love our neighbor just in general? How do we have conversations with people that we disagree with? And how do we keep our emotions in check? And so that's really kind of what this is about. And obviously, if you watch the last podcast or listen to the last podcast, or you saw an example of that happening live, where in that conversation, Julian was calm and I was calm. And part of that is that we had a mutual respect for each other, and it was great. It was a great conversation. And afterwards, once the cameras were off, it was business as usual, And so I think in today's age, there's so much confrontation, and there's so many people who do not know how to handle confrontation. I mean, you can scroll on Facebook and you can see things happening in regards to confrontation, whether it's dealing with a quote unquote Karen, or I like to say a Chad, kind of thing, where they just escalate the situation. And so part of it is like, as men, knowing who we are, we need to learn how to de-escalate situations. We need to learn how to keep our emotions regulated and our emotions in check, even when things get heated. And that's in all walks of life. And I heard it once said, the most dangerous person in the room is the person that's the calmest when chaos hits the fan. And here's the reason why, is because when chaos hits, whether it's a fight or whether it's a verbal argument or whatever, they're not thinking with their emotions. They are trying to logically keep their emotions in check and logically think, how am I going to walk in this situation? How am I going to de-escalate this situation? And so they're engaging their brain and they're using more brain power than quote unquote heart power. And so I think that's super, super, super important to know and to learn how to do. And it took me a long time. Something I want to talk about is, I mentioned in the last podcast of some of my pitfalls, specifically one within marriage and my infidelity. And I'm not going to hit on that in this podcast episode, but I will jump on that podcast or jump on a podcast and talk more about that. In full transparency, I had to send that little clip to my ex-wife to make sure that she was okay with me sharing it, because it's not just my story, but it's also her story. Yeah. And she, I'm excited about this. I'm actually going to have her on the podcast to talk about co-parenting, because I think that's also important. And we're in a really, really beautiful season of co-parenting. But I'm digressing. But going back to escalating and de-escalating, when I was married, I was a horrible, horrible communicator. Me and my ex-wife, we would get in fights all the time, and not just like it would be blatant arguments and yelling matches, and because we just felt like we both weren't being heard. And so the natural thing is, when you feel like you're not being heard, is to raise your voice. And it's crazy the difference between shouting and being loud and yelling versus if you're calm and you collect and you communicate something in that way, where you have a softer voice, and you can, then it's like people actually have to listen in to see what you're saying. And so for me, when it comes to my life, I try to be the person, when crap hits the fan, to keep my emotions checked, to be the most calm, to think. And there was another, I think it was a meme about this too, of like it was had to deal with fighting. Like if I think it was like, if I slap you or whatever, just know that slap's not coming out of the emotion, because I've calculated every step that got us here. And so, and I'm not saying go out and slap somebody. Please do not do that. But work through your emotions. Work through your thoughts. Work through figuring out, how do you put yourself in a situation where you can de-escalate it? Or how do you, and when I say that, there's some points where I'll purposely put myself in a conversation that I know is going to get heated, just to practice de-escalation. I remember, and this came evidently clear to me, I remember I was out with some friends and we were at the range, and we were practicing a real life situation, like we were simulating the situation, and it was like a mishap in the mall where there was an active pew pew person, and so I was the first one to go. And this was I think this was last summer that it happened. Last fall. And this changed my perspective. And so they're like, hey, you're going to go hide behind here. You're not going to know what situation you're walking into. And when you start yelling, or when we start yelling, you can come out and then we'll work through what went right, what went wrong. And so chaos happens, and I book it, book it. And I made a couple mistakes, and there was one moment where I just like everything was happening around me, and I was like, I don't know what to do. 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 And like the whole simulation paused because I let my emotions and my thoughts and my adrenaline go before my thinking. And so everything that I learned, everything that I was taught completely went out the window. And so that's why it's so important, because what is it? It's fight, flight, or freeze. And so I froze. Like I completely froze. And so for me, it's important to put myself in those situations where it's either a simulated conversation, a simulated situation, to learn how to keep my emotions in check. Because I guarantee if I did that simulation again, one, there's a lot of different things that would happen now because I learned from that mistake. I grew from that mistake. And I put myself more into situations where I can still remain calm. And I think, like, if you can't remain calm, like, you got to figure out an exit strategy. You got to figure out an exit strategy on how to exit the situation as fast as possible. I think space is okay. I think walking away is okay. Because at the end of the day, what do you have to prove? And so, yeah. Something else that I wanted to break down in this podcast is a little bit going back to that conversation. And I just want to make a huge shout out to one of my pastors at my church, Noah Rollins. I wanted to have him on this podcast because he just gave a fire message. And I believe that it was like important to listen to, especially after having the conversation last week that went out last week. But he gave out a fire message talking about judgment. And the Bible reference that he used was Matthew 7:1 through 6. So I want to read that. So this is the New Living Translation. It says, "Do not judge others, and you will." So let me start that over. "Do not judge others, and you will not be judged. For you will be treated as you treat others. The standard you use in judging is the standard by which you will be judged. And why worry about a speck in your friend's eye when you have a log in your own? How can you think of saying to your friend, 'Let me help you get rid of that speck in your eye,' when you can't see past the log in your own eye? Hypocrite, first get rid of the log in your eye," as I'm itching my eye, "then you will see enough to deal with the speck in your friend's eye. Don't waste what is holy on people who are unholy. Don't throw your pearls to pigs. They will trample the pearls, then turn and attack you." A lot of bars within those 7 verses. So I'm going to kind of break down this, and I asked Noah if I could use some of his message, and he's like, yes. So shout out to Noah. Part of this podcast is credited to Noah Rawlings. If you're watching this on YouTube, I will link this sermon down below so that you can check that sermon out if you're interested in that. Noah is an amazing pastor, amazing teacher, amazing communicator, very much growing in his craft. But yeah, I would say, Noah, if you're watching this, wearing a brown shirt with black and yellow shoes, it's not the move, bro. It's not the move. I'm just messing. Anyways, I'm giving him crap because his outfit, his shoes were fire, his jeans were fire, his shirt was very questionable for the shoes he was wearing. That's just me being into fashion. But hey, I only wear all black. So once again, I am digressing. So let's hit the first part. Do not judge others, and you will not be judged, for you will be treated as you treat others. And I think you guys have heard me say this in the last podcast and podcasts before, that judgment starts in the Lord's house, right? So the way that we judge others, the way that we judge people who think differently, that's how we are going to be judged, if not worse. And so I think it's very important to be careful of how we judge others, because I think there's two differences. For example, there's a difference between me talking to people that I know who are asking me to hold them accountable, who are asking me to take the specks out of their eyes, or the logs out of their eyes, right? Because that's brother to brother. That permission has been granted. And we're going to talk about the word permission versus a complete stranger who I'm having a conversation with, who I don't have permission to speak into their life. And so I think for me, judging them is like, I have to, one, figure out if I have permission, two, figure out if it's worth it, and then three, make sure that there's not a big old log in my eye. Because I have my own struggles. I have my own problems that I face. So who am I to go to somebody that I don't even know, that I don't have permission to speak in their life, and try to speak game to them when they won't even understand? And so I think part of it is coming, like, the standard that I'm using to judge is a standard that's going to be judged on me. And then it continues on and says, and why worry about the speck in your friend's eye when you have a log in your own? I think sometimes as men, we are problem fixers. I always say, when I'm having conversations with people, I'll say, hey, is this a Bob the Builder, can we fix this? Or is this a conversation about listening? Like, I just need to listen to you and hear you out. And so for me, if I'm struggling, like, so we're, as men, we are natural, like, we want to fix it. But the thing is, there's some things that we have to make sure we have fixed in our life before we fix in another person's life. So, for example, let's just hypothetically say that I struggle with alcohol. I don't. I've never been drunk, never been high, never done drugs. Okay? But let's hypothetically say that I struggle with alcohol. And all of a sudden, I'm preaching to my friends saying, yo, like, last night you got way too wasted. You're doing this and that, the other. But then they're like, yo, why are you speaking this into my life when you struggle with some of the same things? And that's where the word hypocrite comes from. Like, if you're a believer listening to this, you should find some friends that are not believers and ask them what they think about Christians. Because a lot of non-believers that I know, they think that Christians, that we are hypocrites. And there's a reason why they think that way. They think that way because we're too busy focused on the log of the world instead of our own specks. And even in that last conversation, yes, that was like me defending what the Bible says and how I interpretate the Bible. And some of it is a theological thing. But I would never go to a person who's in that community and say, this is what the Bible says, this is what the Bible says, this is what you should do, because I have a log in my eye. There's purity things, there's sexuality things that like I struggle with as a man that I have accountability for. So who am I to go to a complete stranger and say, yo, you need to change your ways, kind of thing. So yeah, that's huge. And then the last part of it was, don't waste what is holy on people who are unholy. Don't throw your pearls to pigs. They will trample the pearls, then turn and attack you. That one's a little bit harsh. I'm going to get a little bit harsh on this one. Something that I've learned is not everybody is open to advice. Even if you went to get the log, the speck, the plank out of your eye, not everybody is open to advice. And so this is where I want to say this, is that it has to come back to understanding what permission is and what permission you have. So when I'm in conversations with people, I will ask one question before I say anything. I will ask this question. So let's say we're in a conversation with one of my close friends and they're saying, man, I am just struggling with, let's go back to this, I'm just struggling with alcohol. My immediate response, and they're telling me their story, my immediate response is this: hey man, I understand that, I get that. Can I have permission to speak into the situation? Or can I have permission to speak into your life? The reason why I ask that question is for two reasons. One, it gives them the opportunity to say yes or no. So they can either grant me permission or they can say, nah, I'm good. Okay. The second reason why is it protects them, but most importantly, it protects me. And what do I mean by that? Is by me asking for permission, if they say no, then they know that I'm not going to speak into that they feel protected. If they say yes, that means that if they get frustrated, they get mad, they get irritated with the game that I'm speaking, that's on them, because they gave me permission to speak into their life. And I really learned this specifically after marriage. Like I went to counseling to figure out how to communicate effectively. And I remember there was a time where I was on a road trip and someone was like speaking into my business. And I remember I was getting so mad because they were like speaking into my business. They were speaking into other areas of my life. And I remember walking into this gas station and I was just so angry. And I remember like it was like a light bulb, like a Holy Spirit thought. And it was like, you're giving this person permission to speak into something that they don't have permission to speak into. And so I had to go up to this person and I had to say, yo, listen, you're speaking all these things, right? Because this person was like saying, like, I was like 3 years into DJing weddings and he was saying I was charging too much. And at that time I wasn't charging enough, looking back. And I remember that was kind of like my last straw. And I remember just going up to him and I'm saying like, hey, you've never DJed a wedding. You've never ran a business like this. And I have so many weddings under my belt. And I just straight up told him, I'm like, hey, you have no permission to speak into into my business. And so permission can go both ways. Sometimes there are people who are going to speak into your life that even though you don't grant them permission, they have permission to speak into your life, like, upper management, bosses, your father and your mother kind of thing. Um, and so, in that, you just have to sit and you have to take it and you have to be good at just like having that conversation. So, that being said, permission goes both ways. And it's okay to tell someone, hey, you don't have permission to speak into this. And I would prefer you not to speak into this. And so that's a huge thing. And I want to jump back to the judgment thing, because like Noah said something that was so fire. God calls us to love unconditionally. But that doesn't mean we have to unconditionally approve. We can love people and still disagree. For example, Julian. I love that dude unconditionally as a believer. But we just had a conversation that we disagreed with. And so, yeah. So I just wanted to jump in and say that. But yeah, going back to permissions, like I think it's learning how to ask people for permission. And then once you have that permission, there's another tool that I like to use of just saying like, hey, can we both agree that this is a safe place to communicate? So that they know they're on safe grounds. So if we're in a disagreement, hey, can we make sure that this is a safe place? Like, yes, you may be saying some harsh things, but you're watching your tone. You're watching how you're saying it. You're open to correction. You're open to criticism. And it's a safe place to be able to communicate. And so, even just saying that, you can just see people just like, but once you say that, you have to remain in that, which I think is hard for a lot of people to do, is to remain in a safe place, because the emotions get the best of us. And like my dad says, when emotion, and this goes back to being the calm one in the room, when emotions are high, thinking is low. So you want to keep your thinking above your emotions so that your logic is smart. And there's times that you have to be emotional, and I think about, like, for me, like, and being a father, I know this well now, is that like time out is not just for your child. It is also for you. I think about my son, and I tell him this all the time. I'm like, hey, like when you're in your room, as long as you're not being destructive, as long as you're, not hurting yourself, this is your place to explore your emotions. And so sometimes I have to shut the door. Sometimes he has to shut the door, and he has to figure out his emotions. Especially when if he doesn't listen to me or something, or he says something that's not appropriate or whatever, and I have to, say, hey, you need to go to your room. The tears, the waterworks. And so, but then when I come back to that conversation, like the first thing that, one, I take my time, because like sometimes like my emotions are like, whoo. And sometimes I have to feel my emotions and acknowledge my emotions, just like how I'm teaching my son, so that I can positively reset. And so like experiencing emotions is fine. So in that situation, it's like, okay, my son is experiencing his emotions. He's in timeout. I'm over here. I'm experiencing my emotions, trying to figure out what the root causes are, learning from like counseling tips that I've been used or that I've used over the years, so that I can go back and go to my son and be like, all right, how do you feel? Why do you feel this way? How can we grow? Why did dad, put you in timeout? Why do you have your consequence? And so, and all of that is like tools that I've learned over time. So I wish that I learned them 10 years ago, but that's life. It's part of growing, you know? And so, yeah. Whew. It's good stuff. Hopefully it's good stuff. I don't know. I think it is. This is stuff that I'm learning. Stuff that I'm growing from. This podcast is going to be a little bit shorter, though. I will say this. We got some fun podcasts that are coming up. Really, really fun podcasts that are coming up that I'm excited about, because I feel like we just hit a heavy topic, the past 2 episodes. So it's like, okay, that we're skirting the lines of fatherhood and stuff like that. And I think it's important to talk about that stuff, like I said. And I think it does come back to, 1, protecting kids, but then 2, also showing people how to love, how not to judge, understanding where judgment starts. And so, yeah, but we got some fun, super fun podcasts coming up. Yeah, so I'm excited about that. But so I kind of want to leave with this. And I kind of gave out the tools for y'all, but I'm just going to re-hit them. So like when it comes to difficult conversations, when it comes to difficult situations, like I would say understanding these couple of things. I think it's 3 or 4 things. 1, when you walk into a situation, understand that usually the quiet, the most calm person in the room is the most dangerous, because they're the ones that are usually thinking logically. 2, ask permission. And then 3, listen actively. So that's engaging in the conversation. Engaging in the conversation, and then asking questions to direct the conversation, to steer the conversation. And then the last one is 4, take care of your business. And by that, I mean take care of your emotions, take care of your logical thinking, or logically thinking. Take care of those things. And so, yeah, that's all I have for y'all. This one's a little bit shorter, which is okay. So, but like I said, we got an exciting podcast coming up. Yeah, I was going to push this one off, but it's with a friend of mine, Abraham Perez. And also, speaking of him, he is one of the co-hosts of a podcast called Between Us. And so if you're a dude and you like just need to laugh, like go watch that podcast. It's 3 brothers. It's a great podcast. They're two episodes in now. And The third one comes out today, actually, I think. Yeah. Um, and it's great. It's great comedy. It's great humor. They get serious as well. But it's just three brothers talking about life. Um, and so if you got a chance, go watch Between Us. Um, and it's amazing. So, anyways, I'm just gonna conclude here. Thank you guys so much for watching and listening. Thank you guys so much for supporting the podcast. Oh, I almost forgot this. The other thing too is we're gonna take this podcast in a slightly little turn, and we're still figuring it out. Um, but obviously, this podcast is mainly about fatherhood. But the episodes that are just me, um, I'm probably gonna talk more about masculinity. Um, because there's my stomach was going off. Because there's a lot of um, red pill content that's out there that's just negative. Where I want to talk about masculinity in positive light, and so um, yeah, and so we're gonna still hear from fathers. We're still gonna learn from fathers, but there's going to be some key points that these fathers bring out that I'm just like, okay, how does this apply to someone who's not a father? How does this apply to someone who is a man, a young man that is just growing in life? And so that being said, I may have a guest on here during during this portion, um, just to talk about this, and they may be, a younger guest, you know, anywhere from like 16 to like my age, single or whatever. Just because, the more that I'm out, the more that I'm finding that like, um, from guys that I talk to that are listening to the podcast are like, man, I really appreciate the fatherhood perspective. Um, but I also like the episodes where it's just you and you're just talking, and not always from a father's perspective, but a man's perspective as well. And so, yeah, so super excited about that. So we're just taking a little slight turn just so that I can, um, cater to some of the men who are out there that are single, that, you know, are trying to be in the dating realm, are trying to figure out what life looks like for them. And so I want to make some content for them as well. Like I said, plus this is my podcast, so I can do whatever I want. I'm just kidding. I have to have some kind of theme. And so I'm just messing with y'all. But seriously, guys, like, thank you guys so much. There's been so many of y'all that have come up to me and said that they've learned some stuff, and I don't know it all. I don't have all the answers, but what I do know is that this podcast is been amazing in my life. I'm learning so much from some of my friends, or all my friends. Every guest that I've had on here, I've learned so much and grown so much. Um, and to be able to give that to you guys, it's been amazing. It's been a blessing. And so thank y'all so much for supporting. And so yeah, so a huge way that you guys can support is, like the content, subscribe to the content, and then share the content, and even just engage with the content. Leave a comment, leave um, some stuff for the algorithm to pick up. And so, but yeah, I really appreciate that. And this is just the beginning. Like, we are just building and building and building, and I can't wait to see where this thing goes. And so, yeah, I think this is 11th episode. Man, it's crazy. This is 11th episode. So, anyways, I'm done. I'm done. Y'all are great. So thank you all so much for tuning in to the Father Built podcast, where we build up fathers in holiness, healthiness, happiness, aiming to give these fathers the tools to build their house of legacy. Thank y'all so much for listening and watching. And like always, remember, peace, love, blessings. We are out. Much love, brother.